folks, Tommy Cowett here, back on the lawn with you from outer space. If you've heard my tagline or motto in the past, it's not rocket science, but we're trying when it comes to what we're trying to do in the garden and with soil and building soils. Got a pretty exciting episode here today. It's a seminar put on by Robert Lawson and the Daub Farm in East Bend, North Carolina. We were treated to visit from Joseph Johnson with ABC Organics, and you can check this out online, ABC Organics with Joseph Johnson, who has actually helped us get closer to rocket science. He is actually a astrophysicist who's developed or helped to develop a product. If you go to his website and understand, there was a gentleman who developed this product line. It's a special way of making a biostimulant that is humic acid based, but it definitely contains a lot of organisms. And the whole thing about Joseph's system of building soil and his agronomic program for farms yields tremendous higher yields. In fact, you'll hear it's a short segment that Joseph puts on, but after a season of growth in the fields and testing afterwards, they actually had a net in nitrogen gain. Unbelievable. A net in nitrogen gain. That was amazing. Robert Lawson helps to narrate, and he's a brilliant soil scientist, farmer from Virginia. You can check out Southern Soils. Look it up online. He sells this product line. Not only did they discuss this, but they also discuss something that I'm very interested in right now, photonic water or structured water. And you can look at some of Adam Abrams' videos online about this is structured water. Try to understand it. I've actually saved or favorited some of those videos so you can find out about the photonic water from Adam Abrams. That's the Rainmaker device, and it can be hooked up to your home spigot or even up to an 8-inch line. There's a lot of videos, there's a lot going on with structured water, and structured water is, you just have to get into it and understand more about it. There's a lot to it. It's simple just running water through this device and restructuring the water, making the water a lot more energized, so to speak. It works better, the water is more active, able to it's more like a surfactant, like you've added a surfactant to your water. A lot of less surface tension in the water. Then the water works much better. There's a field effect from it. It's very exciting stuff. Next up, we had Todd Reese from a really great company, Instagrow. A high-quality liquid fertilizer. And this is not just snake oil. This is just good science and a good way to fertilize your crops, rather than going with a granular approach, which usually kills most of the biology in the soil. This is putting great products to go right into the plant. You're not wasting anything. It's all right in the plant. The plant takes it up, the plant recognizes it. This works as a catalyst to get other products into the plant. This is their calcium product. I think Growing Green's going to begin to use this. We're going to be testing this. He's got a high sulfur product. If you need sulfur, there's fixes. There's a program approach to using the foliar feeds on farms. I know there's a lot of people who are just into the old way of doing things with granulars. But, if we change and the laws are changing, we're going to be limited on how much granular fertilizer we can use due to groundwater issues. So this is the way to go. We were at the Daub Farm. They distribute this Nutran. That's a nice product. They didn't get into it much. It's another liquid feed. So hey, sit back, check out Todd Reese. He's the longest. I mean, he's an agronomist with Instagrow, and I hope you enjoy it. I know I watched it a couple of times and I picked up more and more from it each time. I'm sorry the quality's not that good. The camera I was using wasn't that great. But hey, if you want to learn a little bit and then look into more, Joseph Johnson certainly is a very interesting gentleman from California, Port Hueneme. came all the way to North Carolina and shared his product with us and how he got a lot more nitrogen by the end of the year. Still had nitrogen. He built nitrogen, in other words. He fixated nitrogen from the atmosphere. That's how these microorganisms that he is introducing into the soil work. It's sort of like the product we're using, Organics, in that it does contain the microorganisms. So hey, I hope you enjoy the show. It's kind of a long one. This is the longest video I've ever done, so I better stop now. And Tommy Cowett signing out. Check out Joseph Johnson, Robert Lawson, and Todd Reese. All right, have a great one.
Was interested, or he was happy with the results, so he asked me to come back. So I guess I should talk mainly the purpose of about the main way that my company was formed. It was formed by a man named John Agulia, who was interested in producing very high quality food. Can't hear me yet? Does everyone hear me? All right.
Fred, if you turn this heater on, it's starting to get this roar. It's going to pick it up.
Well,
Is that the understand?
It'll start cooling
Okay.
off just because it's big
Okay.
enough.
So I would say that the interesting thing about my company is that we aren't interested in improving your yields one bit. We're interested in improving the quality of your soil so that it can maintain higher levels of fertilizer in it, which has a side effect of increasing yield. Our main purpose is actually improving the environment. The benefits that farmers receive are kind of secondary to our goal, which is ensuring that the soils are fertile for the next generation. So I guess the way it works, do we have a marker up here? Do you mind if I use this thing?
Yeah, here. Do whatever you want there. There's some.
So I know a lot of people have been told, you know, you go in, you put your fertilizers down, and the fertilizer makes the plant grow. And that's well understood. There was a chemist named Liebig. Not many people know about him, but he was kind of the father of modern agricultural inputs. And he went and he analyzed the tissues of plants and was able to determine, based on that, exactly how much nutrient was required to grow each crop. So I guess I have a question. How many pounds, an interesting question, how many pounds of nitrogen does it take to produce a bushel of corn? Does anyone know, generally? 1? Right. Well, I have a different answer for it. That's accurate as far as what's required to be put in. But I'm going to take you through a little bit of math. What generally people say about 6.25% nitrogen in the corn, correct? That's a general number in total production. Well, truthfully, if we had 200 bushels, 200 bushels of corn, that equals about 12,000 pounds. The interesting thing I would say about my product is last year I grew an acre of corn with no nitrogen input. At the end of the year, I ended up with more nitrogen in the soil than I had to start with. And you'd say, well, that's impossible, right? Well, Liebig found out that more significant than at the beginning of the year, I mean, he started the whole fertilizer company, but then he realized he was wrong. But by that time, the fertilizer industry had already been created, and everybody was already putting nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, everything in it. It was already too big for anyone to stop. And with the marketing and everything else that was done, it made it very easy to just continue on because it was incredibly profitable. Now, people are familiar with, again, the fertilizer that we put in, not so much about what the plant releases into the ground. So I'd done some testing and I realized that with the right microbial communities, the plant was actually able to supply all of its own nitrogen, which is probably why we had a planet covered with vegetation and no nitrogen factories. And I guess the way it works would be if you had 200 bushels of corn times 60 pounds, that would equal a total of 12,000 pounds. Is that right? No. That's 12,000. Yeah. It's 12,000 pounds. 12,000 pounds of corn. Now, if we say there's 12,000 pounds of corn on the acre, then how much of that is actually nitrogen? high nitrogen level, that'd be 7.25%. And that would be 870 pounds or that'd be 870 pounds of protein, which is, so this is total plant matter, protein. And this would be times 0.65 is the conversion from protein to nitrogen. That would be total 54. And truthfully, we're only removing every time at 200 bushels, we're only actually removing 54 pounds of nitrogen every year. And yet we put 200 pounds in. So the question is, where does all that nitrogen go? Well, what we've been studying, or what we found out, is the more nitrogen that we put into the ground, it's kind of like this. If the government paid you $50,000 a year to not go to work tomorrow, how many people do you think would show up to work? Not very many. When we put a bunch of nitrogen in the ground, what we're doing is we're actually stimulating the activity of nitrogen-degrading bacterium. Nitrogen-degrading bacterium do two things. They degrade nitrogen, they degrade carbon. So the more nitrogen we put in, free nitrogen we put in, the more carbon we burn out of our ground, and the more nitrogen that we burn out. So the quicker the nitrogen leaves. That's why every year, if you look at any test from any university, they'll show you and they'll tell you, every year the more nitrogen we put in, the more nitrogen we need to put in the next year to get the same yield. Because the nitrogen degraders, the more nitrogen we put in, the more nitrogen degraders we end up with in the soil, the less carbon we have in the soil, and the more we need to put in next year. So my question was, how do we get out of this? How do we suppress nitrogen degraders so the nitrogen actually stays in and goes into our plant? And that's primarily what our products and our whole system is designed for, is actually building carbon and carbon nutrient retention. Now, nutrient retention is directly related to carbon content. The way that would work is if you start out with calcium phosphate, and everybody puts phosphorus in, it's one of the most necessary inputs. We know we need to put phosphorus in to get the roots under the build for everything to happen. Well, for every pound of calcium, if you have 3 pounds of calcium in your soil, say you have 2,000 pounds and you put in 200 pounds of phosphorus, every single piece of that phosphorus will get eventually turned into a tricalcium phosphate state. And the problem with that is that tricalcium phosphate has a solubility of 0.0001 grams per 100 liters. Or 100 milliliters. That's not very much. So we can say that, well, to get 1 gram in, you would need, or say, wish I could convert this to gallons. To convert it to gallons, you would basically need 126 gallons of water for your plant to get 1 pound of tricalcium phosphate. And that's unacceptable. What's even worse is calcium phosphate, which has a solubility of 0.0000013 grams a liter. That means there's no way, if you have calcium phosphate in your soil or calcium carbonate in your soil, you're ever going to get any calcium into your plant. And calcium is necessary for sugar production and growth. So the question is really, how do plants even grow? That's why we said, when we did the initial test, or Liebig did the initial test, he's like, if we don't put soluble fertilizer in, there's no way the plants are going to grow, right? Well, interestingly, plant growth, when plants grow, they actually also, not only do they grow, when they grow, they release sugar into the ground. And the reason why they do this is to feed bacteria in the soil. And the reason why is because, although you saw the solubility on those two, when they do, what happens is there's a whole biochemical reaction. But basically, it's a fermentation process that begins to produce organic acids. And these organic acids change the solubility of all of the fertilizer in the soil. So the first one that will be generally produced is a citrate, or polyhydroxyl carboxylic acids, which you'll see oftentimes on chemicals or chemical products. They'll have it listed, polyhydroxyl carboxylic acid. It's normally a citric acid or a relative thereof. Now, citric acid, interesting, with citric acid, it increases the solubility. Once that sugar is turned into a citrate, every molecule of citric acid will actually take up 3 molecules of calcium, or it takes 2 to pull up 3. And at that point, the solubility goes from of calcium carbonate goes from 0.0000013 grams per liter to 0.026. And that's a really big difference. That makes it actually possible for your plant to drink enough water and absorb nutrient. But what's even better than citrate, the secondary reaction, when the citrate breaks down, it will produce a lactate, which goes to 0.13. And there's one more that can be produced. Once a lactate, if it's decomposed, it can turn into a propionic acid. And propionic acid will actually, solubility is actually 54 grams a liter. And this is the difference between no bacterium in your soil and active, super active bacterium in your soil, as far as the math of when the sugars are released and the acids produced. So you can get an idea of how much you're missing if you don't have bacterium active and functional. You basically cannot grow, not to any large extent. Now, the reason why, I guess one of the first things that interested our company in this was that we would go out to a virgin soil. Every time we go to a virgin soil, break new ground, and plant a crop, where we get the best yield we'd ever gotten. And we never get that yield again planting on that ground. They're in year after year. We could put the chemicals back in, whatever we wanted into the ground would never produce the same. And I guess the question would be why. I mean, we're putting in the right amount of fertilizer, we're using our pesticides, we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing, so what's missing, what's different? And the answer is bacteria, the bacteria change. In a virgin soil, you'll actually have hundreds of different species of plants living in that ground. And each one of them produces different compounds and feeds different types of bacteria. And what you end up when you look at virgin soil, you'll actually have not just a handful of bacterium, you'll actually have a huge wide range of bacteria, millions and millions of species and subspecies. And that is, most of them are just about impossible to classify or to isolate. They can't actually be classified or isolated. And so what my company has done is gone to produce a product that is not just a handful of bacterium in a bottle that you spray down, but rather the entire biomass that exists in virgin soil, and recreate that same kind of growth that we get when you first break a new ground, you first plant a new soil, that first year's crop. And we have been quite successful at it. I don't like to toot my own horn so much, but if you want to talk to Robert Lawson, he's witnessed at least 1 year's effect of it, of the biologicals applied. The main effects that we can see is an increase in the overall availability of nutrients, where your nutrients aren't going down every year, but they're actually building as the ground builds. The root depth increases every year as the ground builds. And interestingly, the funny thing about this is when calcium gets to this form, it's actually an insecticide called calcium propanoate. And it's in every one of your breads. It's what we use to keep bread from molding on the shelf. Well, that should be produced in the soil and be being absorbed by the plant, and should end up in every single seed of corn and wheat that you have. That seed should not rot if the proper biological action is happening. And I think that's about all I have to say. I hope this was informative and perhaps educational or entertaining somewhat.
Thank you.
I got a question.
Sure.
When you use the sprays we're using today, a lot of people use water from municipality, which has chlorine in it.
Mm-hmm.
What does that chlorine do to your product?
Well, generally, if someone's using chlorine, I'll have them use a water filter, or I have a device for that. But yeah, chlorine kills stuff, so you wouldn't want to
It kills
necessarily
good and bad bacteria.
Well, the problem with it is that the chlorine actually binds on, I have humates in it, which I use as carriers for the bacteria, and when the chlorine interacts with a humate molecule, it creates some undesirable compounds. In fact, I would not use chlorinated water with any human type product, which most of the ones that I've seen around here have that in it, or even any product with sugar in it. Chlorine has some undesirable effects on organic compounds, and it can randomly produce different drugs effectively. So I wouldn't use it. You can use there's a device called the Rainmaker, which is one way of doing it, where you can run it through, and what it does is it causes all the chlorine to react with the calcium, and converts it to a calcium chloride. And that makes it so that the water is no longer dangerous, at least bacterium damaging or
Are
poisonous.
those systems very expensive?
No, not really.
What do you put tablets in it, something in it?
No, it works differently. It works through the system that makes it work is fairly sophisticated, but it's simple. It's a simple device. You run water through it. It doesn't ever break down. You just run water through it. You can test it on the back end and see the change.
It takes the chlorine out, turns it to what, calcium one?
No, it reduces the chlorine. So you end up with chloride. Calcium chloride is not toxic. In fact, it's shown, or it's considered to be a pesticide by the EPA because it has been shown to increase tomato yields and shut down fungus and do a bunch of other stuff. So it actually turns it from a poison to something that
What's the name of this?
Huh?
What's the name of that device?
Rainmaker? Robert Lawson knows about him.
Okay.
Good stuff, you Does anyone else have any questions? No? You're up.
I don't think so. I think I got 5 more minutes there. I think Robert wanted to say a few words maybe.
All right.
That was great, though.
Basically, I've worked with Joseph for the past year or so, and we've had just fantastic results. We've had wheat in Merlin with the 16 ounces per acre. We ended up side-by-side test. We were talking about a 20 bushel yield. Test weight, 2 pounds more. Same fertilization program. We just dropped in and put the 16 ounces of GrowPro. And afterwards, we followed up with soybeans. And the soybeans, you could actually see the root system was a whole lot different. It was deeper. The beans yielded another 10 to 15 bushels to the acre over top of where we just had the fertilization plan without the Joseph's program. And on my farm, we followed up. We did a 50-acre strip with 16 ounces per acre on milo, sorghum, depends on what part of the world you're from, what you call it. But anyway, same fertilization plan. The rest of the sorghum on about 400 acres averaged about 88 bushels to the acre. On Joseph's 50 acres there, we're looking at 120 to 125. And that's the only thing we did different. It was the 16 ounces. I mean, it was an incredible just increase, but just the input. Down to the east, we're having salt problems, like Joseph mentioned. In 5 weeks after soil application, and we ended up following in cotton there. The cotton, the weeds, everything. It was about twice the height. The water was actually penetrating. And
Right, so that it all becomes one product. So when you turn the bottle over, as you have some in front of you, there's nothing in there. It's clear. And you know, this 318-1999, you cannot freeze it. It will not freeze. It's a very high quality. It'll be fed right to the plant. You can actually, it's actually fed to cattle and things like that through supplements. And so it's interesting to see. We make a wide range of starter plant foods, 19.9, 318-18s, 515-15. They all have a place. 10-10, 525, 15-3-3, 16-4-4 for the lawn care industry. Used to use that for pre-tassel on corn, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that because this application we've been doing for about 14 years now is really making some good money. In fact, I haven't hit less than 22 bushels 12 years in a row. And this is a wide spread of coverage territory. Now that's 22 bushel. Most of them coming in the 30s. Think about it. 30 bushel, one crack, one application at the right time. It's kind of like starter plant food at the right time when the seed germinates and that phosphate's there and it can grab it at the right time. And it makes all the difference in the world. It moves down and it's starting to look for water. It's getting itself together and it's setting the path for the direction it's going to go for the rest of the year. Because that first day is very critical to a plant, no different than to an animal. Making sure it's got all the good stuff it needs, milk. You know, milk is very critical, and phosphate to a plant's critical. So we manufacture those types of products, and then we came along in the 80s, a later part of 80s, and created probably one of the best products I've ever seen in response, and it's a liquid calcium. Now there's chelated calciums. You guys probably heard of chelated calcium. This is a little different. We also manufacture a chelated calcium. But this calcium, to chelate it, we have to take all the inner ingredients out, which really makes this thing really nice. And what we were looking at with this calcium and why we created it, fellas, on the research farm, you know, you try to make everything right, you know, your preparation of the soil and the seed depth is correct and consistent, and you use a good genetic of seed and all that good stuff, and you make sure you got the elements in the soil that you're looking for. And so everything was good. I'm trying to give you an idea just from memory on what the pHs were, and they ran anywhere from 6.5 up to 6.9. We had some 7s. Base saturation on calcium was anywhere from 71. We had them as high as 83%. Our base saturation on K, we were in that 3 to 5% range. Calcium-wise, we had anywhere from, on these particular research fields, from 2,200 pounds all the way up to 4,600 pounds an acre. Then what we did, planted the crop, let it germinate, and then we started testing the leaf tissue from the first one come out of its life. You know, it come up, you got your first leaf, you start testing it. We started testing the seedlings upon germination too, just interesting to see what that little thing contains. And every plant that was out there at a very young age was deficient in one element. What do you think that element was? The most deficient element. Any ideas? Calcium. That's exactly right. And you know, you sit there and you think, okay, I've got a good pH, I've got a good base saturation of calcium, I've got loads of calcium out there. What's the problem? Solubility. It's one of the reasons why Ken Pullman and my grandfather created water-soluble test reports. A lot of guys are using them now, and I'm glad to see that, because it really gives you a good idea of what's out there. You know, you may have 400 pounds of potash out there. How much of it's truly soluble? Because a plant doesn't care if it's not soluble. If it can't digest it, it means nothing to it. But we like to see those numbers, you know, 400 pounds, 100 pounds of phosphate, and boy, we're good to go, right? Not so. The solubility makes a big difference. Again, fellas, I'm not saying that we don't grow good crops and you guys don't grow good crops, do a good job, but I can tell you what I've seen. And we can really, really move these yields up in a good, positive way. And so anyways, we go back to the calcium, and so the only answer we came up with is add more calcium, still came up with the same result the next year. And so we finally said, okay, let's take calcium carbonate, okay, like when you take a ton of lime, how much, out of 2,000 pounds of lime, how much of the good stuff do you think's in there?
600 pounds.
400 to 600 pounds, exactly right. Just depending on where it comes from and who's the best.
If it's technically 100%, yeah, it'd be about 600 pounds.
Yep, and that's it, 600 pounds. The rest of it's filler, basically. You know, the 600 pounds, and then you got to say how much of that 600 pounds can I actually retrieve and utilize. And so the thing about calcium is kind of like nitrogen, and one of the reasons why nitrogen's in the problem, and phosphates at times, is that nitrogen's a mass-flowing element, and so is calcium as a mass-flowing element, believe it or not. Both of them are mass flows. Calcium carbonate, I should say. And so what we were seeing was, I'm going to draw kind of a battery type thing here and put a positive and a negative. And when I look at soils, I look at them a lot like this, because you've got cations, you've got ions, and did you know that there's a negative, there's electrical charges down there? It's amazing how they work. It really is. Has anybody went out there and plugged your soil in lately? Into a socket, you know? Re-energized it? If you can't do that, all you got to do is use Instagrow. We got the Energizer in there. But it's amazing when these things get compacted, these little colloids or soil colloids, that's your soil particles, and when they get compacted, which, hey, we're all guilty of it, we're farmers ourselves, and there's been times that we didn't get in there, we wouldn't have planted the crop, or we wouldn't have got the crop off. And so unfortunately, there's times you go in there maybe a little wet, and you think, you know, I'll do a little work on it, it'll decompact. It's amazing how long it takes to correct that problem from that one time. Iowa State did some research on compaction and did it over 12 years. And they purposely compacted an area and left it there and monitored the yield difference. You know, that thing was still persistently correct and yield loss after 12 years. Unbelievable. Compaction's a real problem, but when you squeeze these platelets together, or let's say that I've got an imbalanced soil, so I've got a lot of magnesium. By the way, most soils that I've been in lately are pretty high in magnesium. What's the soils around here like? Anybody know what your magnesium levels are? Are they high, Meg? Any idea on percentage, or you remember if it's like above 20% or below 20? It really doesn't matter. When it gets high magnesium, what happens to your soil? Any ideas? You lose nitrogen. And you get a very hard soil, too. Very hard to penetrate, very hard to move water through, very hard to breathe. In fact, it's interesting, you know, when they went up in Vietnam, they actually took high rates of magnesium anhydrous to make the runways, to land the big planes on. And think about that. Anhydrous and magnesium, and boy, they had concrete runways. So when magnesium gets out of balance, now we need magnesium. It's a very, very important element. You got to have it. But when it's out of balance, then it becomes a big issue. And there's a lot of things. You know, sodium. You get high salts, which a lot of plant foods contain a tremendous amount of high salts. You get sodium levels out of balance in the soil, and you know, if you have a little dry spell, you get a little bit of rain, that plant has a hard time even taking up rain if that sodium level is extremely high. So in a drought situation, such as Western Kentucky was for a couple years here not long ago, I'm not sure how you guys, I think you guys have been pretty decent here for a while now, haven't you, for rainfall?
2-3 years.
Of dry or pretty good weather?
Wet.
Wet, huh? And so out there, you could just look at the soil reports and the sodium levels kept climbing and climbing because Mother Nature normally washes it down with rain. It pushes that sodium level down. When she comes up, it creates a problem and actually makes a plant hard to drink water, believe it or not. That's something. So anyways, going back to this. I look at a soil like a battery, positive, negative charges. And if you get, like I say, high magnesium sitting on here, or a bunch of magnesium on these platelets, or you get a high rate of any type of element, or compaction, it slows that process down just like you had corrosion on a battery. Then you cannot convert plant foods easily. Manure. Who uses manure? Anybody raise animals here? Put manure on. And if you got high mags or you got platelets that are coated, it's hard to convert that manure over to usable plant food. There's a report out there too called Composition of Soils. And we talk about putting on 200 pounds of this and 150 pounds of that. Did you know that in the Corn Belt area and surrounding areas, that there's naturally 40,000 pounds of potash in 6 inches of soil? 40,000 pounds, up to 10,000 pounds of phosphate. How much do we really need? A soil sample gives you what is supposed to be soluble of that. Then we take a water soluble report which goes one step further. But it's amazing what's out there if we can just unlock it. And part of it's the whole thing is getting back to getting the impurities out, getting the microbial life, getting the life back in the soil. We've done a wonderful job of kicking its butt, and it is hurting us. Now, I know we see some yields out there, but not what we can. I mean, the potential is tremendous. And when you work with guys that feed, you know, the cattle and hogs and stuff, it's amazing what I hear from them and the feed value of what we're producing. And it's just getting the soil back to the basics, natural state. So anyways, we create a liquid calcium. Again, we're going back to, well, it mass flows, right? So how are we going to keep it in that spot? You know, we're only looking at 3 gallon, 5 gallon, 7 gallons an acre, not putting on 2 ton or 2,000 pounds or 3,000 or 4,000 pounds. We're putting on 5 gallons. Well, we started researching for chelating agents, and we came across a chelating agent that was a tremendous deal for us. It kept the calcium there, but what we kind of seen, when you go back to this, well, I'll give you an example. There's a bottle, it's called a leachate. It's a glass jar with holes in it, and it's got a collection plate in the bottom. They call them leachades in the chemist lab. And what you do is you fill this thing full of soil, and then you take your products and water, you simulate rain, and you let it absorb through here just to see what did we push, what did we move through the soil, what happened. Calcium by itself went right through the soil. Very, very little was held in the soil, believe it or not, and mass flowed right down. I'm only talking about a jar yay big, but you got to represent somehow. And so when we took the calcium with the chelating agent and the energizer, put it in the same process, we found very little calcium move through. But we did pick up some other elements, amazingly enough. Like magnesium. Magnesium's a tough one when it gets hard. So you can't just pull it out and get rid of it, but you can push her down. Where's our plants feed at? Do they feed in the top inch, or is it 2 feet down the soil? Where do they feed from? The top 6 inches, top 5 to 6 inches. So if you've got high magnesium and you can push her down, you release a tremendous amount of food value up here. Tremendous amount. What we've seen with the inner ingredients of the calcium was actually helping to cleanse, or what we call cleansing the colloids of the soil. We can actually knock magnesium off and replace it with calcium. See, it's like little chairs on these platelets, and everybody has a place at their dinner table. You got phosphate, potassium, calcium, zinc, manganese, magnesium. But when they're out of balance, somebody's kind of sucking up all the food. It's not fair, he's not sharing. And what happens is we were actually able to see some of these magnesium and make it a little more even. Knock them off of that seat and replace it with calcium. How important is calcium to a plant?
Cell wall.
It's essential for the Krebs cycle of energy, for generating energy or sugars.
To me, it's one of the most important elements in the beginning because, you know, he mentioned something about a natural insecticide, and we've been promoting that since we come out with the Instacal, and see, it'd be 35 years, 37 years ago. And our produce growers use our Instacal and our Instasol for insecticides. They don't use any insecticides on their produce. None. They do it all with the Instacal and Instasol. So it can be done. No insecticides. I like that. I like that because I really don't care to eat it. But so we've seen tremendous things happen by the calcium application, and water-soluble samples, I mentioned something about that the last time. Water-soluble gives you an idea of how much nutrition in that soil is actually usable. Following the calcium applications, we've seen that increase tremendously. The water-soluble side kept coming up and up and up, and that's what we were after. The magnesium would come in place. We could see percolation of the soil coming back, where you can naturally move water up and down. When that soil becomes so tight, the water comes and it sits there. If the soil's where it should be, you should be able to take that water up when you need it, and you should be able to move her down. It should naturally flow. But when she comes tight, it can't. Earthworm populations die down. I mean, it's tremendous. I mean, you know, we really don't think about it. See a couple earthworms out there, but who go out there? Does anybody go out and count them? I don't specifically go out and count them, but I have at times monitored them. And they produce a tremendous amount of nutrition on their own. Their secretions is really great plant food. So if you increase that population, they can add not just aeration, but they can add nutritional value. You can't do it with conventional fertilizers. I guarantee it. You cannot do it. So that's kind of what's behind our program. I like using the starters in the row. Like I say, they're packed full of nutritional value. Not just 318-18s, 918-9s. It's the inner ingredients inside them that really make it what it is. The calcium program that we got is a tremendous product. I recommend it on every acre we utilize. And just to get the things going, add some calcium to it. And the other thing is we also make a nitrogen product. And I know that we talked a little bit about that, and in theory, he's exactly right. It's going to take a while for some of us not to use nitrogen on corn, though, I think, you know, in our mindsets, right? I mean, it's not an easy thing to do to drop it out, but you certainly can reduce it tremendous amounts. And we proved that just by split applying it. Do you guys split apply your nitrogen now, or does it all go down at one time? Are you splitting it up? And you know that's helped tremendously. because you conserve a little bit. So anytime you can reduce it down, that's the key. And you know, using some of the products that he's talking about in manufacturing, and make use of it. But in the meantime, we do have a liquid nitrogen that's a food-grade urea nitrogen. It can be foliar fed to the plant. Okay, we can combine it with our plant food products, and such as corn. You know, we got certain times of year that corn is foliar fed. You got your seed starter. It's kind of like corn grows kind of like this as far as uptake. You know, you got your seedling here, and at this time she's taking up a little nutrition. But as that plant grows, that demand goes up and up and up. And so here's where we call ear initiation. And believe it or not, this should be done at 3-leaf stage. Okay? Because soon after, that corn plant is determining the size of the ear and the rounds and the kernels long. So if you can fill that plant full of food, it'll set a better ear every time. If it's a little dry, you know, it's hard to get food up into that plant because it moves with water, right? So if it's dry, you can't get plant food up in the plant. So how important does foliar feed become? It's tremendous beneficial and useful, and I'm glad to see guys using it more and more. In fact, I have several of my growers now that are actually going across their fields twice so they can put herbicide on separate from foliar, because they're seeing such a great response from it. You know, it costs a lot of money to put an acre of corn out, don't it? So if we can increase our potential there tremendously, this is one of them. Okay, first thing you do, you got to set the path of that seedling's life. Give it what it needs in the beginning. Okay, some phosphate, some zinc, and get it moving in the right direction. Then at your 3-leaf stage, now you can put that with herbicides. I'm not saying you can't. Always do a compatible test to see how they mix well, but you can put them together. But I tell you, I do like the idea of going separate. I just spent some time with a fellow out in Illinois by the name of Walker, and they right now are farming 37,000 acres. You believe that? 37. How many times do you think he sees each one of his fields a year? You think he ever sees them?
No.
Never. But they've got 7 planters that goes at one time, and they're big. And so they use liquid plant food. And he didn't foliar feed. But he's got some friends that I've been working with for a few years. And they keep hearing what's going on, and he goes over and visits them, and he sees the kind of yield they're producing in their corn and how it looks and what they're seeing happening in the soil. So now they're interested in the Instagrow program. He doesn't foliar feed, but he's going to go over that acreage separately to foliar feed it. That's a big commitment to make. But it works, so he's seen it work. This is important here, and what I do here is a little 3-18-18 most generally, and I put just a little bit of super in with it, right into the leaf tissue, and then here is pre-tassel. Pre-tassel. Now this is 2 weeks prior to tassel. Now you can go 3 weeks or 3.5, depending on your sprayer. You can get over top of it, and some of it's done by airplane, helicopter too. But you can, on a big sprayer, get over this at 3 weeks prior to tassel. This is the one here that I told you that right now I've not hit less than 22 bushel, 12 years running. No less. Our top was 76, and the control was 176 bushel. The control wasn't bad. 76 bushel, pretty hot. But that's only, that's not consistency. I mean, that happened. That was still pretty nice to see. Most of them are seeing or realizing between 22 and 35, 36 bushel. The application will cost you somewhere between $35. So if you're producing 22 bushel corn or 30 bushel corn, even at today's prices, you're still going to profit $80 an acre. That's not bad profit, is it? If it's something you've never done before. Those are the kind of things I guess I look at, what we can do to increase our bottom line on that acre. We can grow different crops. Oats is almost $5 a bushel, believe it or not. I've never seen it. He says he's seen oats up that high. I've never seen oats up that high before. But, we grew 800 acres of canola for the last 5 years. Of course, we had a market not too far away, so it made it a little easier. But, when prices were down before they came up, we ended up growing some canola and grew something different for our price per question. You guys are the first. I had to come to North Carolina, right? That's where I'm standing at, isn't it?
No.
Come on, guys. You mean not one question out of all you farmers? Are you serious?
Where you buy this at?
Lewis Driver, this gentleman right here are my distributors. Lewis has been with me. I want to mention something. Lewis has been with our company now for...
Way before you were born.
He thinks I'm younger than that for some reason. How many years? 41?
I've been using the product for 45 years.
45 years. So I was 3 years old.
I hadn't used any other fertilizer at all. Hadn't used any lime for 30 years. The program works. It'll get you yields, big yields. And you throw Instagrow in with what Robert's talking about, you're gonna get something.
When
Water.
I've been with liquid myself for 22 years. And back when we were dry fertilizer, it was religiously every other year to keep the pH at 6.5, we had to put 2 tons of lime down. And you best put it down. And after I went to liquid, I'm going in 10-year stretches. And I'm not even losing maybe a half to 1 point, depends. I've got the soil back like that. Look at the money at the price of lime. I mean, I don't like to ride that tractor see keep putting the lime down. It's a timely thing. It's a costly thing now. And just think about it. And not only that, liquid is in the form where the plant will take it up right now. It may be 6 months, a year later before some quarries vary, some lines vary, but still, it's a lot of money being wasted out there, and it's coming from the dry fertilizers with the acids and the salts, knocking it down. And once we got away from that eliminated that problem.
You gotta remember, that stuff's big business, the dry fertilizer and muriate of potash, because that stuff creates such a high salt content, it creates a perfect atmosphere for insects and diseases to thrive. Well, then you got somebody making insecticides and fungicides. I mean, it's just a big money-making cycle. And so you had a question, sir, and I don't think I answered your question, and I asked for a question. Please.
How much it costs per gallon?
How many what?
How much it costs per gallon?
The cost per gallon?
Each product is different, so we'd have to get with you. Each product a different price.
How about comparison with this liquid product with dry fertilizer?
Program-wise, you're going to be actually a little bit cheaper and on dry versus liquid for sure. Now, and remember, there's so many liquids out there. Some of these liquids are, you don't know. You got to watch what you're getting so that you're getting something good. Like I said, we do guarantee our purity, virgin grade materials, and all the stuff that's inside of it. And so we are not going to be the cheapest on the block with all of our stuff we put into it. I'll tell you that right now. But we have the best quality, guaranteed that. And we add things to it. If it was just a plain Jane 989 or 31818, it'd be a couple $1 a gallon cheaper, $1.50 a gallon cheaper. But when you add stuff to it, it creates cost. But it's been worth it to add that to these products. They've just helped us so much in the field. And I'm looking forward to adding more different things like biological stuff, and I think that's something that'll just really, really help to move us forward with what we're doing, because what we're doing is working tremendously well for us, and we're getting some good soils out of it. Yes, sir.
How many gallons do you run a year?
I run a year or just as a starter. Here I'm going to run.
How you put it down?
Yeah, I'll tell you what I put it down here. On the seed, I'm running anywhere from 5 to 8 gallons. Okay.
Run that in the furrow?
Right in the furrow, right on the seed, right on the seed. That's where I want it. It's the most efficient way of when you're using a high quality plant food like this. I don't like it have it 2 or 3 inches over, because you got to remember the soil has a tremendous amount of nutrition already locked up, and so you want little soil contact. You want that right on top of that seed. Now you go further to the east and south, I don't put as much on. Down by Myrtle Beach, 50 miles, 40 miles from Myrtle Beach, I'm using about 3 gallons because they got organic matter of 0.02%. That's a big deal. Is there any 0.02% here? Don't think so. I mean, that's pure beach sand, so that makes a difference. So I'm using 5 to 8 here. Here at air initiation, I'm putting on 2.5 of 31818, and I'm putting on 1.5 of Super N nitrogen. Now the other thing on the Super N nitrogen that we're doing is we're reducing the rates up front too. Because you can put in, I can put in as high as so that would give me about 13 units of nitrogen right in that corn by foliar feeding it. And so 13 units in the corn, that's a big deal as far as what you would put in the soil to get that much nitrogen in that plant. So you can really monitor your nitrogen rates by reducing it up front, put a little bit on here, a little bit on there. A nitrogen test is pretty cheap, fellas, compared to what it costs to put it down at such a high rate. You know, to think that nitrogen stays there all year is ridiculous. I know we'd like to, it costs a lot of money, and we think, well, we're putting it down there, it's there for us, right? There's a professor out of North Dakota that did a lot of work on nitrogen, and he says that 32% nitrogen, and these are two of the products he tested, at 64 degree soil temperature, you can lose 50% of it within 2 weeks. Think about that. 50% of what you put down in 2 weeks at 64 degree soil temperature. That's another thing that's important, fellas, to remember. Seed germinates at what? 52, 53, 51 on occasion, 54 degrees, right? Did you know that your soil's fertility really doesn't get cranking over until she gets up in that higher temperature soil, 68, 72 degrees. She's firing on all 8 cylinders. But at that low temperature, she hasn't really come back to life yet. So you're not even getting any help from what you build up in the soil at that point in time. But you planted a little seedling out there. That's what gives us an advantage of putting this in the row and getting it up and moving. Getting it moving, getting it looking for water from day one, not waiting for plant food. That's why a lot of times you see corn where it's a little cool in the spring and it's a little pale, it's not really doing much, get a little warm weather and boom, she's green. Some of that comes from not just the warm weather and the heat units, it's getting some plant food to that plant, it's conversion. So you can do it by doing this, and you don't have to worry about the water situation, the temperature, or things like that. It'll feed it. It just needs something to feed it to, a root structure or a plant leaf. So here I'm putting on 2.5 to 1.5. Here, there's a couple reports, one from Rutgers University, 1987. Look it up online, fantastic work. State of Illinois University put out 2 years ago the same type of research on monitoring the uptake of nutrition, the plant's nutrition through day one all the way to completion. And it's interesting, we've talked about this ever since we've been working with plant foods, that phosphorus, potassium, nitrogen, zinc is just as important at tasseling that it is in the beginning. And those reports will show you that it is exactly right. One of the reasons why we're getting such a good yield, you know, we're putting on 2.5 to 3 gallons of 3-18-18 here, and I'm putting on 2.5 gallons of 23% Super N. That's what we call our Super N nitrogen, which is also loaded with carbons and sugars and energizer and humics. Okay? So I'm using, at the low end, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 gallons. But I'm expecting 280 bushel, 350 bushel corn, too. Oh, yeah. Nitrogen separate from the starter. But you can reduce nitrogen up front by putting a little bit in the plant, you know, because, you know, I mean, 10, 12 units in a plant, it takes a lot of units beside the plant to get that much in the plant. So it's a good way to reduce nitrogen, and you can monitor because you can feed it without burning. Now, you can burn if you want to dump 20 gallons on there. You're going to burn it up pretty good. So you got to not put 20 gallons at one time on, but, you know, to put on 2 or 1.5 to 2.5 or 3 or 4 gallons, no problem. 2.3 pounds per gallon. Put on 4 gallons, you've got what? 10 units of nitrogen. Plus the 3-18-18 or 9-18-9, whichever you choose to use. And I've got a lot of guys that are doing this now because not putting so much nitrogen up front, getting ahead of what's coming, because eventually you will be told how much nitrogen you can put down. It will be controlled, phosphates, everything.
State of Maryland already has done.
Yeah, that's right. And it'll be according to soil test, and so you'll be told what your limits are. So a lot of guys are trying to get ahead of this, and they don't want to contaminate the rivers either. So, you know, and it's a proven fact. You know, you get down to the Gulf down there, and she's in bad shape, fellas. There's not much life, is there, down there? Where she dumps out into the Gulf of Mexico, the Mississippi
Lots of
River.
life, just the wrong kind.
Yeah, well, right.
What product are you using for your starter?
if I'm not in a sandy soil, if I'm in a sandy soil, I'll use a 525. That's just what I like. And to be honest with you, phosphate, that's what she's after. So if I need a little potash, or I feel my potassium's on the low side, I'll go 318-18. I like, or 9-18-9. So the three that I use is this one, for my growers. See, I've handed some of my growers over to my distributors and things like that. I still write, 50 personal programs for some of my largest growers, and that's, 10,000 acres and above. I can't help everybody, but when I'm doing my program and writing my recipes, these are the three I use, right here. This is a nice one, no doubt about it. High in phosphate, 525 is a very nice product. 9-18-9 is a beautiful product. 3-18-18 is a beautiful product. What do you need, where's your potassium and things like that at? And he mentioned something up here about phosphate and how important it is. Phosphate is one of the most elements that are tied up. It's unbelievable. In fact, I had a fellow one time, I pulled a soil sample and it's 1,000 pounds an acre. And I didn't actually pull it, but I got it back and I said, did you pull this where the cows walk out of the barn? He says, no, not right there, but obviously it was a little too much phosphate. He needed phosphate worse than the guy down the roads. And had all that phosphate out there, but it was just tied up. When things get out of balance, you tie them up. And so phosphate's one that's hard to become soluble. It really is. Got to have it. So those are the three I use.
Another nice thing God, I love it. It just saves me a trip when I'm going to top dress wheat, that I can take their nitrogen and put like a, whether it would be a 9-18-9, 3-18-18, 5-15-15, I can blend it with the nitrogen and not have to make a special trip. That means a lot. I don't like to keep riding over the field. And it'll blend, don't have a problem. Some other companies, you can put it together if you sandwich it at the right time, the water like an Oreo cookie, but sometimes you just have a bad hair day and it doesn't work. This, mix it together, go on out there, get her done.
And it's beautiful the way she blends together, and we made it that way. It took a lot of work, it did, to get this type of nitrogen to mix with this stuff. But for grass hays and corn, soybeans, the nitrogen needed for soybeans are tremendous. If you want yield from soybeans, feed it some nitrogen. Not a lot, but this foliar feeding like I'm doing on soybeans, I run at third trifoliate. And see, that's another thing too. If you wait to fourth trifoliate, fifth trifoliate, you wasted your money. You might as well just throw it away, or give the money back, or give it away, or roll it down the window and throw it out the window. And that's no joke. You've got to hit it at third trifoliate or you're wasted. Now you can be early, but if you're late, you're done. And what we're doing there is trying to set the bloom set. So we want as many bloom sets as we can get, preferably 5 or 7 per cluster, or 8. And then the next on spray for foliar feeding beans, believe it or not, you're investing some money and harvesting them 7-8 weeks later. You're doing it at 70%, 65% pod set. The uptake of nutrition at that time for soybeans is unbelievable. But we just don't have enough solubility to carry it all the way. So going over the top of it, great way